My name is Sophia Martinez, and I'm 29 years old. I'm sitting in this sterile hospital chair with poison dripping into my veins, watching my phone buzz with messages from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. My sister Jessica just typed, "We can't keep dealing with your drama anymore." My brother Daniel added, "You're being too negative. It's affecting our kids." Then my mother Linda delivered the final blow. "Maybe you should focus on getting better instead of your silly business." My father didn't even bother with the group chat anymore. He just sent a cold text saying he was stepping back from my situation entirely. As my phone battery dies, I see an eviction notice email from the family-owned apartment I've been living in. The irony isn't lost on me. While cancer is trying to kill my body, my own family is systematically destroying everything else. Before we dive into how this nightmare led to the biggest victory of my life, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button if you've ever felt abandoned when you needed support the most. Make sure to subscribe because this story proves that sometimes your greatest betrayal becomes your most powerful fuel for success. Now, let me take you back to where this devastating journey really began. 6 months before that horrific hospital moment, I was living what I thought was a charmed life. I had just secured $2 million in funding for my AI healthcare startup, working 16-hour days building something that could revolutionize how doctors detect diseases early. The irony was absolutely crushing when I discovered the lump in my breast during a routine shower. Here I was, creating technology to save lives, while my own body was betraying me. The diagnosis hit like a freight train: aggressive triple-negative breast cancer. At 29, I was supposed to be building my empire, not fighting for my life. When I called my family to share the devastating news, their initial response seemed supportive. My sister Jessica, who worked in marketing, immediately offered to help manage communications with my investors. My brother Daniel, always the practical one, suggested we create a family plan to support me through treatment. My mother Linda cried appropriately and promised she'd be there for every appointment. Even my father Robert, typically emotionally distant, seemed genuinely concerned about his youngest daughter. But support from my family came with strings attached that I didn't immediately recognize. Within 2 weeks of my diagnosis, Jessica started making subtle suggestions that maybe I should step back from day-to-day operations. "You need to focus on your health, Sophia," she'd say with fake concern. "Let the business take care of itself for now." What I didn't know was that she had already started reaching out to my investors behind my back, positioning herself as the family representative who could provide stability during my health crisis. Daniel, meanwhile, began spreading carefully crafted rumors throughout our extended network. He'd tell people I was struggling emotionally with the diagnosis and that my judgment might be compromised. When mutual contacts would ask about my condition, he'd shake his head sadly and say things like, "She's just not herself anymore." This whole cancer thing has really changed her perspective on reality. These weren't outright lies, but they planted seeds of doubt about my mental stability and capability to run a high-stakes business. My mother Linda took a different approach: emotional manipulation disguised as maternal concern. She'd call me multiple times a day, asking detailed questions about my treatment schedule, my energy levels, and my business meetings. At first, I thought she was being caring, but I soon realized she was gathering intelligence. She'd use this information to call my employees directly, expressing concern about how much stress I was under and suggesting they might want to consider other opportunities before the company became unstable. My father Robert's abandonment was more straightforward but equally devastating. He simply started returning fewer calls, making himself unavailable for family dinners, and treating my cancer diagnosis like an inconvenience to his well-ordered life. When I needed someone to drive me to medical appointments, he'd suddenly remember important golf games or business meetings. His emotional withdrawal was so complete that I started to question whether he'd ever really cared about me at all. The first major betrayal came when I discovered that someone in my family had leaked my medical condition to several tech blogs. The articles were carefully worded to avoid outright invasion of privacy, but they contained enough specific details about my diagnosis and treatment timeline that potential clients started asking pointed questions. Within a week, I lost 3 major contracts as companies cited concerns about leadership continuity and uncertainty about project completion timelines. My business partner Michael, who I'd considered a close friend, began distancing himself almost immediately. During our weekly partnership meetings, he'd suggest bringing in interim leadership or finding additional support to handle my responsibilities. When I pushed back, reminding him that I was still perfectly capable of running our company, he'd exchange meaningful glances with other team members as if to say, "See, she's not thinking clearly." The most devastating part wasn't the business impact, it was the realization that the people I trusted most were actively working against me during the most vulnerable period of my life. Every conversation became a minefield where I had to decipher whether genuine concern was being expressed or whether I was being manipulated. The stress of trying to maintain my business while starting cancer treatment was already overwhelming, but adding family betrayal made every day feel like an impossible battle on multiple fronts. As I sat in my oncologist's office getting my treatment plan, I kept thinking about how my family's behavior didn't match their words. They'd text supportive messages, but undermine me in person. They'd offer help, but create additional problems. They'd express love, but demonstrate through their actions that my success threatened them more than my potential death concerned them. I was about to learn that this was only the beginning of their systematic campaign to destroy everything I'd built. Starting chemotherapy while trying to maintain a business would have been challenging under the best circumstances, but my family seemed determined to make it impossible. The aggressive treatment regimen required me to spend entire days at the hospital every 2 weeks, with several recovery days when I'd be too exhausted to function normally. During these vulnerable periods, when I needed support most, my family's sabotage escalated dramatically. They created a group chat specifically to coordinate their efforts, one that deliberately excluded me. I only discovered this when my cousin accidentally sent me a screenshot meant for someone else. The messages revealed a calculated campaign to convince everyone in our extended network that I was mentally unstable and that my business was failing because of poor judgment related to my cancer diagnosis. Jessica had appointed herself as the family spokesperson, regularly updating relatives and family friends with exaggerated accounts of my declining mental state and unrealistic business expectations. The medical sabotage was particularly cruel. Jessica somehow obtained the contact information for my oncologist's office and called claiming to be my primary caregiver. She told my doctor's staff that she was concerned about my mental health and suggested that my denial about the severity of my condition was affecting my treatment compliance. When Dr. Sarah Chin, my oncologist, mentioned during my next appointment that family members had expressed concerns about my psychological state, I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Daniel escalated his professional sabotage by directly contacting my investors and key business partners. He'd call them with fake concern, explaining that as my brother, he felt obligated to share that I was not handling the cancer diagnosis well and that my decision-making had become erratic and unreliable. He'd suggest that they might want to protect their investments by reconsidering their partnerships with my company. Several investors started asking detailed questions about my health during business calls, creating an impossible situation where I had to defend both my business strategy and my mental competence. My mother Linda took her manipulation to new levels by interfering with my living situation. The apartment I was renting was owned by my father, and she convinced him that I was too sick to live alone safely. Without consulting me, they hired a locksmith to change the locks on the family lake house where I'd been planning to recover between treatments. When I called to ask why, Linda tearfully explained that they were protecting me from making bad decisions while under stress and that the isolation wasn't healthy for someone in my condition. The insurance complications were the most sinister aspect of their sabotage. My health insurance, which had been coordinated through my father's business for years, suddenly became complicated with paperwork errors and coverage questions that required hours of phone calls to resolve. Every time I'd get one issue fixed, a new problem would emerge. It took me weeks to realize that someone with access to my personal information was deliberately creating these complications to add stress and distraction during my treatment periods. My father Robert's complete emotional abandonment became official when he stopped responding to my calls and messages entirely. When I needed someone to drive me to chemotherapy appointments, his assistant would tell me he was traveling or in important meetings. I later learned from a family friend that he'd been telling people I was too dramatic about my diagnosis and that he was practicing tough love to help me develop independence. The cruelest discovery came when I found out that my family had been actively spreading rumors that I was terminal and not expected to survive throughout our extended social network. They'd crafted a narrative where they were the long-suffering family members dealing with my unrealistic optimism about recovery while preparing for the inevitable tragedy. This explained why so many family friends had started treating me with the pitying kindness reserved for the dying rather than the encouraging support I needed as someone fighting to live. Jessica's betrayal reached new depths when she began courting my biggest client for her own consulting firm. She'd arrange lunch meetings with executives from companies that had contracts with my business, expressing her concerns about continuity and offering her services as a more stable alternative during this difficult transition. She was literally using my cancer diagnosis as a business development strategy to steal my clients. Daniel's workplace performance actually improved during this period because he was receiving sympathy and recognition for dealing with a family crisis. His colleagues praised him for being so devoted to supporting his struggling sister, while he was actually working to destroy everything I'd built. The irony was devastating. He was getting professional advancement by pretending to care about me while systematically undermining my professional survival. The second major betrayal occurred when Daniel filed a false police wellness check request, claiming he was concerned about my mental state after I'd missed a family dinner due to chemotherapy side effects. Police officers arrived at my apartment during a period when I was extremely ill from treatment, demanding to evaluate my psychological condition. The humiliation of having to prove my sanity while dealing with the physical devastation of chemotherapy was beyond description. As my hair began falling out in clumps and my energy levels plummeted, I found myself attending every medical appointment alone while my family posted cheerful photos on social media pretending everything was normal. The contrast between their public image as a loving, supportive family and their private campaign of destruction was so stark that I began to question my own perception of reality. The stress of fighting cancer while defending myself against family sabotage was slowly destroying my ability to function in any area of life. The systematic destruction of my life reached a crescendo during my 4th month of treatment. By this point, my family had perfected their coordinated assault, attacking my business, my health, my finances, and my sanity simultaneously. Every day brought new betrayals disguised as concern, making it impossible to distinguish between genuine support and manipulation. Jessica's client theft became blatantly aggressive when she started attending industry conferences introducing herself as Sophia Martinez's sister and business representative. She'd distribute her own business cards while explaining that she was helping manage communications during Sophia's health crisis and that companies might want to transition their partnerships for continuity purposes. Several of my long-term clients called to ask if I was stepping down because Jessica had implied that my cancer was more serious than I was admitting. The situation with my lead developer Marcus became a perfect example of my family's sophisticated manipulation tactics. Daniel approached him at a local tech meetup, buying him drinks and expressing genuine interest in his work on my project. Over the course of several conversations, Daniel painted a picture of a company in decline due to my inability to focus and suggested that Marcus deserved better opportunities. He never directly offered Marcus another job, but he connected him with 3 different companies that happened to be offering positions at 50% higher salaries than I could afford to pay. My mother Linda's legal maneuvering revealed the true extent of their planned destruction. She consulted with a family lawyer about having me declared mentally unfit to manage my affairs due to what she called cancer-related cognitive decline. The attorney explained that if she could demonstrate that my judgment was impaired by my medical condition, they could potentially gain legal control over my business assets and personal finances for my own protection. Linda began documenting every conversation where I expressed frustration or exhaustion as evidence of my declining mental capacity. The insurance sabotage escalated when my father Robert used his business connections to make my health coverage even more complicated. He contacted the insurance company's corporate office, expressing concerns as a family member about my ability to manage my own medical care. This resulted in additional reviews and requirements that delayed approval for certain treatments and medications, creating dangerous gaps in my care during critical periods. My business mentor Thomas, who had been advising me for 2 years, suddenly became unavailable for our regular meetings. When I pressed him for an explanation, he reluctantly admitted that several people in our professional network had suggested that associating with me during my difficult period might reflect poorly on his judgment. The isolation was becoming complete. Even people who weren't related to me were distancing themselves based on the narrative my family had created. The third major betrayal occurred when Jessica deliberately sabotaged my presentation to a major potential investor. She knew I had a crucial meeting with a venture capital firm that could provide the funding to keep my company viable during my treatment. The night before the presentation, she called the lead investor claiming to be my concerned sister and suggested that they might want to postpone the meeting until Sophia was in better condition to make important decisions. When I arrived for what I thought was a routine pitch meeting, I found confused investors who had been told I was struggling with cancer-related cognitive issues. My business partner Michael used this sabotaged meeting as justification to officially move forward with removing me as CEO. He called an emergency board meeting, citing concerns about leadership stability and presenting Jessica's call to the investors as evidence that even my family didn't believe I was capable of running the company. The board members, who had been receiving a steady stream of subtle messages about my declining capabilities, voted to place me on medical leave and install Michael as interim CEO. Being fired from my own company while fighting cancer was devastating beyond description. The business I'd built from nothing, the technology I'd developed, the team I'd assembled, everything was taken from me under the guise of protecting my health. Michael assured me that this was temporary and that I could return when I was better, but we both knew that once I lost control, getting it back would be nearly impossible. The financial impact was immediate and crushing. Without my salary as CEO, I couldn't afford the rent on my apartment, even though it was owned by my family at a discount rate. The irony of being evicted by my own relatives while undergoing chemotherapy was so cruel that I couldn't process it intellectually. I could only feel the raw emotional devastation of complete abandonment. The physical confrontation occurred when I tried to attend what I thought was a family dinner to discuss my situation. Instead, I walked into an intervention where Jessica, Daniel, Linda, and Robert sat me down to explain why they were doing this for my own good. They presented a united front, taking turns explaining how my cancer had changed me and how I was no longer thinking clearly about what was best for my future. When I tried to defend myself, pointing out the obvious contradictions in their behavior, they exchanged knowing looks as if my anger proved their point about my mental instability. The stress of defending myself on multiple fronts while dealing with chemotherapy's physical effects caused me to nearly faint during this confrontation. My family used this medical episode as further evidence that I was too sick to make rational decisions, and Jessica insisted on calling an ambulance despite my protests. Being hospitalized for complications related to stress and exhaustion, while my family stood around discussing my poor judgment, was the lowest point I could imagine reaching. As I lay in that hospital bed, connected to monitors and IVs, listening to my family discuss my life as if I wasn't there, I realized that they had successfully isolated me from every source of support and security I'd previously relied on. My business was gone, my housing was threatened, my professional relationships were damaged, and even my medical care was being influenced by their manipulation. They had turned my cancer into a weapon against me, using my vulnerability to destroy everything I'd worked to build. The eviction from my apartment marked the beginning of the darkest period of my life. With nowhere else to go and no family support, I found myself living in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, taking Uber rides to chemotherapy appointments, while my family posted happy vacation photos on social media. The contrast between their public image and my private devastation was so stark that I began to understand how thoroughly they'd planned my destruction. My former employees stopped returning my calls entirely, and my LinkedIn connections seemed to disappear daily as people distanced themselves from what they perceived as professional failure combined with personal tragedy. The tech community, which had once celebrated my innovative work, now treated me like a cautionary tale about the dangers of trying to maintain a business while dealing with serious illness. The fourth major betrayal came when I discovered that my mother Linda had used her access to my personal information to empty my business savings account. As my emergency contact on various financial accounts, she'd convinced the bank that I was unable to manage my finances due to medical cognitive decline and that she needed access to protect me from making poor decisions with money I'd need for treatment. When I tried to contest this, the bank representatives treated me with the patronizing kindness reserved for people they'd been told were mentally compromised. Sitting in that sterile motel room, bald and exhausted from chemotherapy, watching my savings disappear while my family enjoyed the money they'd stolen from me, I reached a level of despair I didn't know existed. The physical pain of cancer treatment was nothing compared to the emotional devastation of realizing that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had turned my mortality into an opportunity for their personal gain. The isolation was complete when I realized that my family had been strategically telling people I was terminal to generate sympathy for themselves, while making it clear that investing any emotional energy in me was pointless since I wouldn't be around much longer. This explained why distant relatives had stopped calling and why former friends treated me with the uncomfortable kindness reserved for the dying. My first ray of hope came from an unexpected source, Dr. Sarah Chin, my oncologist, who began noticing inconsistencies between what family members were telling her staff and what she observed during my appointments. During one session, she asked me directly about my family's claims that I was struggling with depression and denial about my prognosis. When I explained the systematic sabotage I was experiencing, she initially seemed skeptical, but my detailed accounts of their behavior began to paint a disturbing picture. Dr. Chin revealed that Jessica had called her office multiple times claiming to be my primary caregiver and expressing concern that I was not accepting the reality of my condition. She'd also suggested that my business stress was interfering with treatment compliance and that the medical team should consider recommending that I step away from professional responsibilities entirely. This confirmed my suspicion that my family was using my medical team as unwitting accomplices in their campaign to control my life. The second unexpected ally emerged in the form of James Rodriguez, a janitor at the hospital who'd been observing my situation during my frequent visits. James, who was 45 and had helped his wife through a similar cancer battle, recognized the signs of family betrayal because they'd experienced something similar. One day, as I sat alone in the waiting room crying after another devastating family interaction, he sat down beside me and quietly shared his story. James's wife Maria had faced breast cancer 3 years earlier, and her family had used her vulnerability to try to gain control of a small business she'd inherited from her grandmother. Like my situation, they'd claimed they were protecting her while systematically undermining her autonomy and financial security. The difference was that James had recognized what was happening and helped Maria protect herself legally and emotionally before the damage became irreversible. Dr. Chin and James formed an unlikely support network that began helping me understand the full scope of my family's manipulation. Dr. Chin explained that family members often called medical offices claiming to be concerned about patients' mental health as a way to gain information or influence treatment decisions. She'd seen cases where relatives used medical crises to gain legal control over finances or property, particularly when significant assets were involved. James provided practical support that I desperately needed. He'd drive me to appointments when I was too weak to manage transportation, help me grocery shop when walking through stores was exhausting, and simply sit with me during the long chemotherapy sessions when facing the treatment alone felt overwhelming. His presence reminded me that genuine support existed, even if it didn't come from the people I'd expected to provide it. The fifth major betrayal occurred when my brother Daniel attempted to have me declared legally incompetent, filing paperwork claiming that my cancer treatment had resulted in significant cognitive decline that made me unable to make rational decisions about my health, finances, or future. He'd gathered testimonies from family members about my erratic behavior and poor judgment to support his claim that legal intervention was necessary for my own protection. This legal attack was the most devastating yet because it threatened to make the family's informal control over my life official and permanent. If Daniel succeeded, they could gain legal authority to make all medical, financial, and personal decisions on my behalf, effectively turning me into a prisoner of their manipulation. The irony that they were using my fight against cancer as justification for taking away my fundamental rights as an adult was so cruel that I struggled to comprehend their capacity for calculated destruction. Dr. Chin and James helped me understand that I needed to document everything and seek legal protection before Daniel's competency hearing. They connected me with resources for people experiencing family financial abuse during medical crises and helped me gather evidence of the systematic sabotage I'd been experiencing. For the first time since my diagnosis, I had people in my corner who were fighting for my interests rather than trying to exploit my vulnerability. As I lay in that motel room planning my legal defense while recovering from chemotherapy, I realized that my family's betrayal had stripped away every illusion I'd held about unconditional love and familial support. But it had also revealed something powerful, my capacity to survive complete abandonment and begin building something better from the ashes of their destruction. Living in that motel room while undergoing chemotherapy treatment gave me something I hadn't expected: complete freedom from my family's oversight and manipulation. For the first time in months, I could think clearly without constantly defending myself or trying to interpret hidden agendas behind seemingly supportive comments. In the quiet hours between treatments, when my energy was slowly returning and my mind was clear, I began working on something that would eventually transform my life completely. Using my laptop and the spotty motel Wi-Fi, I started developing a new AI platform that built upon everything I'd learned from my previous company, but incorporated innovations I'd been unable to implement while dealing with investor pressure and partnership constraints. The technology focused specifically on early cancer detection, inspired by my own experience with delayed diagnosis and the inefficiencies I'd observed in current screening methods. Dr. Chin became an invaluable resource during this secret development phase. As my treatment progressed and we built genuine trust, she began sharing insights about the practical challenges oncologists faced in early detection and patient monitoring. Her perspective helped me design features that addressed real clinical needs rather than theoretical problems, making my new platform significantly more viable than my previous work. James continued providing practical support that allowed me to focus on development work during my recovery periods. He'd bring groceries, help with laundry, and simply sit quietly while I coded during the days when I felt well enough to work, but too weak for normal activities. His wife Maria, who was now 3 years cancer-free, started visiting regularly and sharing her experience rebuilding her life after her family's betrayal. During these conversations, I discovered that my family had been claiming ownership of my original ideas and intellectual property. Jessica had launched a consulting business specifically focused on healthcare AI, using concepts and frameworks she'd learned from observing my work. She was presenting herself as the real innovator behind the technology, claiming that she'd been helping Sophia develop her ideas and that my illness had prevented me from properly executing the vision. Daniel had leveraged his connection to my former company to get promoted at his own workplace, presenting himself as someone who understood cutting-edge healthcare technology because of his involvement in his sister's startup. He was literally building his career on the foundation of work he'd helped destroy, using my innovations to advance himself professionally while I struggled to survive in a motel room. My mother, Linda, had positioned herself as a tragic figure in our community, receiving sympathy and financial support from friends and neighbors who believed she was caring for a terminally ill daughter with unrealistic business dreams. She'd created a narrative where she was the long-suffering mother trying to help her stubborn child accept reality, all while using the money she'd stolen from my accounts to maintain her lifestyle. The discovery of their appropriation of my work was initially devastating, but it also revealed something crucial. They didn't truly understand the technology they'd stolen. Jessica's consulting business was struggling because she could only mimic the surface-level concepts without grasping the underlying innovation that made them valuable. Daniel's workplace presentations impressed people who didn't know the field, but couldn't withstand scrutiny from actual experts. This realization gave me a significant advantage as I developed my new platform. I could build something fundamentally better than what they'd stolen, incorporating advances they couldn't possibly replicate because they'd never understood the core principles that drove the innovation. My new technology, which I privately called Health AI Solutions, represented everything I'd learned from both my previous success and my family's betrayal. Dr. Chin introduced me to Dr. Amanda Foster, a venture capitalist who had survived ovarian cancer and now focused specifically on healthcare innovation investments. Dr. Foster understood both the technology landscape and the unique challenges of maintaining professional focus during cancer treatment. When I presented my new platform concept during a coffee meeting that felt more like therapy than a business pitch, she immediately grasped the potential impact of what I was building. The secrecy was essential because I knew my family was monitoring my activities, hoping to find evidence of poor judgment or unrealistic planning to support Daniel's competency claim. By developing Health AI Solutions completely independently, using only my own resources and knowledge, I was protecting the intellectual property while building something they couldn't touch or contaminate with their manipulation. James's wife, Maria, revealed that she had significant business experience, having successfully run her grandmother's import company for years before her cancer diagnosis. Her family's attempted takeover during her illness had been unsuccessful, partly because she'd protected her business assets and partly because James had helped her maintain operational control. She offered to help with the business development aspects of my new platform, bringing expertise that complemented my technical skills. Working with Dr. Chin, Dr. Foster, and Maria felt like building a chosen family of people who understood both professional excellence and personal survival. Unlike my biological family, these relationships were based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine support rather than manipulation and exploitation. They celebrated my progress, offered constructive criticism, and provided encouragement without hidden agendas. As my chemotherapy treatments continued and my new platform developed, I began documenting every aspect of my family's betrayal and theft of intellectual property. Dr. Foster connected me with legal experts who specialized in protecting innovators from family financial abuse, and we began building a comprehensive case that would prevent them from claiming ownership of my new work. The most satisfying aspect of this secret development was realizing that my family's betrayal had actually freed me from the limitations and compromises that had constrained my previous work. Without investor pressure, partnership conflicts, or family drama, I could build exactly the platform I envisioned. Their attempt to destroy me had inadvertently given me the space and motivation to create something far superior to what they'd stolen. By the end of my chemotherapy treatment, Health AI Solutions had evolved into a comprehensive platform that addressed multiple aspects of cancer detection and monitoring. I'd secured provisional patents for the core innovations, established the legal framework to protect the intellectual property, and assembled a team of advisors who understood both the technology and my personal situation. My family remained completely unaware that their attempt to reduce me to a helpless victim had actually catalyzed the creation of something that would soon change all our lives forever. Completing my chemotherapy treatment felt like emerging from a long, dark tunnel into sunlight I'd forgotten existed. When Dr. Chin delivered the news that my latest scans showed no evidence of disease, I experienced something I hadn't felt in almost a year: genuine hope for the future. But unlike the naive optimism I'd possessed before my diagnosis, this hope was tempered by hard-won wisdom about human nature and strengthened by the knowledge that I'd survived complete abandonment. Health AI Solutions had grown from a secret project into a legitimate company with serious potential. Dr. Foster invested $5 million to become co-founder and chief medical officer, bringing not only financial resources, but also credibility and connections throughout the healthcare investment community. Her involvement signaled to other potential investors that this wasn't just another healthcare startup, but a carefully developed platform with genuine clinical applications. Maria Rodriguez officially joined as Chief Operating Officer, bringing business expertise that perfectly complemented my technical skills and Dr. Foster's medical knowledge. Her experience rebuilding after her own family's betrayal made her uniquely qualified to understand both the personal and professional challenges of what we were building. James continued providing practical support while also handling facilities management and operations logistics with the quiet efficiency that had made him invaluable during my treatment. The company's first major breakthrough came when we secured a contract with a regional hospital system to pilot our early detection platform in their oncology department. The technology's ability to identify potential cancer markers weeks earlier than traditional screening methods generated immediate interest from medical professionals who'd been struggling with delayed diagnosis issues. Dr. Chen served as our primary clinical advisor, helping refine the platform based on real-world usage and feedback. Meanwhile, my family remained completely unaware of my professional resurrection. They continued spreading their narrative about my failed business and unrealistic expectations about recovery, telling anyone who would listen that I was still struggling to accept reality about my situation. Jessica's consulting business continued declining as clients realized she couldn't deliver on the innovations she claimed to understand. While Daniel's workplace presentations became increasingly hollow as colleagues began asking detailed technical questions he couldn't answer. The media attention began slowly, with healthcare technology blogs covering Health AI Solutions as an emerging platform in early detection innovation. The articles mentioned my previous experience in the field, but focused primarily on the technical capabilities and clinical potential of the new technology. My family saw these articles, but didn't initially connect them to my current work, assuming they were discussing my previous company or giving me undeserved credit for other people's innovations. My discovery that my family was planning to contest my father's revealed the true depth of their calculated cruelty. They intended to claim that my cancer treatment had left me mentally unstable and therefore unfit to inherit anything, with the assets being redistributed among the competent family members who had responsibly managed the crisis. Daniel had been building this legal strategy throughout my treatment, gathering what he claimed was evidence of my declining judgment and poor decision-making capabilities. Jessica's business struggles intensified as her stolen concepts proved impossible to execute without understanding the underlying technology. Several clients demanded refunds when her consulting services failed to deliver promised results, and her reputation in the healthcare AI community began suffering as word spread about her inability to support her claimed expertise. She started becoming more aggressive in her attempts to associate herself with any success I might achieve. Daniel faced unexpected challenges at his workplace when colleagues began researching the healthcare technology he'd been discussing in presentations. Several people discovered articles about Health AI Solutions that credited me with innovations he'd been claiming to understand, leading to awkward conversations about his actual level of expertise in the field he'd been presenting himself as knowledgeable about. The breakthrough media coverage came when TechCrunch published a comprehensive article about Health AI Solutions, featuring my photo and identifying me as a cancer survivor CEO who built a revolutionary detection platform while undergoing treatment. The article detailed the technology's capabilities, the clinical trials we were conducting, and the potential impact on early cancer detection worldwide. It presented my story as an inspirational example of entrepreneurial resilience rather than the tragic narrative my family had been promoting. My family's reaction to discovering the true scope of my success was immediate and panicked. Linda called my phone repeatedly, leaving voicemails that attempted to reframe their behavior as tough love designed to help me develop independence and strength. Jessica sent long emails claiming that their actions had been misunderstood and that they'd always believed in my capabilities. Daniel showed up at my new office building trying to apologize and requesting a meeting to clear the air about recent misunderstandings. My father Robert's response was particularly revealing as he attempted to reinstate me in his will while simultaneously claiming he'd never really intended to exclude me permanently. He contacted his attorney to reverse the changes he'd made during my treatment, then called me to explain that his previous actions had been protective measures designed to ensure I didn't make financial decisions while under stress from treatment. The family's sudden change in behavior was so dramatic and obviously calculated that it confirmed everything I'd suspected about their motivations. They'd never been concerned about my health or well-being. They'd simply been positioning themselves to benefit from what they assumed would be my failure or death. When my success became undeniable, they immediately attempted to reposition themselves as supportive family members who had been misunderstood, rather than acknowledge their systematic betrayal. The most telling aspect of their response was how they began telling people they'd always supported my business ventures and had been helping behind the scenes during my treatment. Jessica started claiming she'd been protecting my interests by maintaining relationships with industry contacts, while Daniel suggested he'd been gathering market intelligence to help me when I was ready to return to business. Their ability to rewrite history so completely demonstrated the same calculated manipulation they'd used throughout my illness. Extended family members who had completely ignored me during treatment began reaching out with congratulations and requests for meetings. Cousins who hadn't returned my calls during chemotherapy suddenly wanted to discuss investment opportunities and family business ventures. The contrast between their previous abandonment and current enthusiasm was so stark that it felt like interacting with completely different people. Michael, my former business partner who had orchestrated my removal as CEO, attempted to claim partial credit for Health AI Solutions by suggesting that my current success built upon work we'd done together in our previous company. He contacted several media outlets offering to provide background information about my earlier innovations, positioning himself as someone who had helped develop my technical expertise, rather than acknowledging his role in my professional destruction. As Health AI Solutions continued gaining recognition and our client base expanded, I realized that my family's betrayal had inadvertently created the perfect conditions for building something far superior to what I could have achieved with their support. Their attempts to isolate and control me had forced me to develop genuine independence, authentic relationships, and innovative solutions that would have been impossible under their influence. The morning I received the call that would change everything forever, I was sitting in my new office overlooking the city, reviewing clinical data from our latest hospital partnership. Dr. Foster knocked on my door with an expression I couldn't quite read, somewhere between excitement and disbelief. Behind her stood James, holding a cup of coffee and grinning like he'd just won the lottery. "Sophia, Dr. Foster said carefully, "We need to talk about something rather significant that just happened." The acquisition offer came from MedTech Innovations, one of the largest healthcare technology corporations in North America. Their chief technology officer had been following Health AI Solutions through industry publications and clinical trial reports, recognizing that our platform represented a genuine breakthrough in early cancer detection rather than incremental improvement to existing technology. The offer was $92 million for complete acquisition, with retention packages for all key personnel and commitments to expand the platform's development and deployment. As we sat in the conference room reviewing the acquisition terms, I couldn't help thinking about the cruel irony of the situation. 18 months earlier, my family had been working systematically to convince everyone that I was mentally unfit to run a business and that my technology was worthless fantasy. Now I was being offered more money than any of them had seen in their lifetimes for work I developed while living in a motel room and fighting for my life. The news broke in TechCrunch within hours of our accepting the preliminary offer, with the headline, "Cancer Survivor CEO's Startup Acquired for $92 million After Family Abandonment During Treatment." The article detailed not only the acquisition terms, but also my personal story of building a revolutionary platform while undergoing chemotherapy and dealing with family betrayal. The journalist had done extensive research, interviewing Dr. Chin, James, and other people who had witnessed my journey from abandonment to success. My family's reaction was immediate and desperate. Linda called my office repeatedly, demanding to speak with me about urgent family matters that required immediate attention. When my assistant explained that I was in meetings regarding the acquisition, Linda became increasingly agitated, finally screaming that she was my mother and that I owed her basic respect regardless of whatever misunderstandings had occurred during my treatment. Jessica's response was particularly calculated as she attempted to position herself as someone who had been supporting me behind the scenes throughout my recovery. She started posting on social media about how proud she was of my success and how the family had always believed in my capabilities. She even shared old photos of us together with captions suggesting ongoing sisterly support and collaboration. Daniel's workplace situation became extremely uncomfortable when colleagues began asking pointed questions about his previous claims regarding healthcare technology expertise. Several people had read the TechCrunch article and realized that the innovations he'd been presenting as his own understanding were actually my intellectual property. His supervisor requested a meeting to discuss accuracy in professional presentations and his actual level of expertise in technologies he'd been claiming to understand. My father Robert's attempt at reconciliation was the most transparent and pathetic of their efforts. He arrived at my office unannounced, wearing his most expensive suit and carrying flowers, demanding to see me immediately. When security informed him that he wasn't on my approved visitor list, he became indignant, explaining that he was my father and that family emergencies took precedence over business protocol. He waited in the lobby for 3 hours, apparently convinced that I would eventually agree to see him. The media coverage expanded beyond technology publications as mainstream outlets picked up the story of family betrayal and entrepreneurial triumph. Local news stations requested interviews about overcoming adversity. Business magazines wanted to profile my journey from cancer patient to successful CEO. And healthcare publications sought technical details about our platform's clinical applications. The narrative of surviving both cancer and family abandonment resonated with audiences who had experienced similar betrayals. My extended family's response revealed how thoroughly my immediate family had poisoned our relationships during my treatment. Aunts, uncles, and cousins began calling to apologize for their behavior, explaining that they'd been told I was terminally ill and not thinking clearly about business matters. They'd avoided contact based on information from Jessica, Daniel, and Linda rather than reaching out to assess my situation independently. The most revealing aspect of my family's panic was how they began telling completely different stories to different people, unable to coordinate their damage control efforts effectively. Jessica told some relatives that she'd been protecting my business interests during my treatment, while telling others that she'd been supporting my emotional recovery. Daniel claimed to some people that he'd been gathering market intelligence for my eventual return to business, while telling others that he'd been trying to help me develop realistic expectations about my future. Michael's attempted insertion into my success story became increasingly desperate as he contacted multiple journalists offering insider information about my background and previous work. He suggested that health AI solutions represented natural evolution of concepts we'd developed together, conveniently omitting his role in removing me from my own company during cancer treatment. Several reporters fact-checked his claims and discovered the true timeline of events, leading to additional coverage that further exposed the systematic betrayal I'd experienced. The acquisition process moved forward rapidly as MedTech Innovations' due diligence confirmed the platform's technical capabilities and market potential. Their legal team was particularly impressed by the comprehensive intellectual property protection we'd established, which prevented anyone else from claiming ownership of our innovations. Dr. Foster's involvement as co-founder provided additional credibility, while Maria's operational expertise demonstrated our ability to scale the technology effectively. The contrast between my chosen family's celebration and my biological family's panic was stark and illuminating. Dr. Chin, James, Maria, and Dr. Foster were genuinely excited about the platform's potential impact on cancer detection and the resources we'd have to expand our life-saving work. Meanwhile, Jessica, Daniel, Linda, and Robert were focused entirely on how they could benefit financially from success they'd actively tried to prevent. As the acquisition moved toward completion, I realized that my family's betrayal had been a devastating gift in disguise. Their systematic attempts to destroy my autonomy and success had forced me to build something far superior to what I could have achieved under their influence. More importantly, it had revealed the difference between people who supported me unconditionally and those who viewed my vulnerability as an opportunity for their own advancement. The final media interview before the acquisition was completed took place in the same hospital where I'd undergone chemotherapy 18 months earlier. As I sat in the oncology waiting room where James had first offered his support and Dr. Chin had provided both medical care and friendship, I reflected on how completely my life had transformed. The family who had abandoned me was now desperate to reconnect, while the strangers who had chosen to support me had become the most important people in my world. The family meeting they requested took place in the conference room of my attorney's office, neutral territory that would prevent the emotional manipulation tactics they'd used so effectively in our home environment. As I sat across from Jessica, Daniel, Linda, and Robert for the first time since my treatment ended, I was struck by how small they seemed compared to the powerful antagonists they'd been in my mind during the darkest periods of my illness. Jessica broke down first, her carefully maintained facade of successful independence crumbling as she admitted that jealousy had driven many of her actions during my treatment. She explained through tears that watching me build a successful company while she struggled in traditional marketing roles had made her feel inadequate and angry. When my cancer diagnosis created vulnerabilities she could exploit, she'd convinced herself that she was leveling the playing field rather than acknowledging that she was sabotaging someone who was fighting for their life. Her confession revealed the depth of calculation behind her betrayal. She admitted to deliberately calling my investors to plant doubts about my capabilities, stealing client contacts to build her own consulting business, and spreading rumors about my mental stability to undermine my professional relationships. Most devastatingly, she acknowledged that she'd hoped my cancer would be severe enough to permanently remove me as competition for family attention and professional success. Daniel's revelation was equally disturbing as he explained how family pressure and his own insecurities had driven his participation in the systematic sabotage. He'd always felt overshadowed by my academic and professional achievements, and my cancer diagnosis had seemed like an opportunity to finally be the successful sibling who was solving problems rather than creating them. His attempts to have me declared mentally incompetent had been motivated by a desire to prove his own competence and importance to our parents. The most shocking aspect of Daniel's confession was learning that our parents had actively encouraged his legal maneuvering, suggesting that gaining control over my assets would be best for everyone involved. They'd convinced him that my business success was temporary and unrealistic, and that taking legal control would protect both me and the family from the inevitable financial disaster they assumed was coming. My mother Linda's emotional manipulation reached new heights as she attempted to reframe their abandonment as tough love designed to help me develop independence and resilience. She claimed that their systematic sabotage had been character-building and that my current success proved their methods had been effective. Her inability to acknowledge the cruelty of using someone's cancer diagnosis as a tool for family control revealed a level of narcissism that made genuine reconciliation impossible. Linda's most devastating admission was that she'd stolen money from my accounts because she'd been convinced I was going to die and wouldn't need the resources for recovery. She'd viewed my business savings as inheritance she could access early, and her protection narrative had been cover for what she knew was theft. Her shocked reaction to learning I'd survived and thrived demonstrated that my death had been an acceptable outcome in her calculations. My father Robert's attempt at justification was perhaps the most pathetic of all their explanations. He claimed that his emotional withdrawal had been protective because he couldn't handle watching me suffer and that maintaining distance had been easier than facing the possibility of loss. His abandonment, he suggested, had been about his own emotional limitations rather than any judgment about my capabilities or worthiness of support. Robert's confession revealed that he'd been planning to exclude me from his will permanently, not as temporary protection, but because he genuinely believed I wouldn't survive treatment. His recent attempts to reinstate me were motivated entirely by the acquisition news rather than any genuine remorse about his behavior. He'd literally written off his daughter as a terminal case and was now scrambling to benefit from her unexpected success. As I listened to their explanations and justifications, I realized that each family member had created elaborate narratives to avoid confronting the basic truth. They had chosen personal benefit over supporting someone they claimed to love during the most vulnerable period of her life. Their betrayal hadn't been the result of misunderstanding or miscommunication. It had been calculated exploitation of my weakness for their advantage. I presented the comprehensive documentation I'd gathered of their sabotage, including phone records showing Jessica's calls to my investors and clients, financial records proving Linda's theft from my accounts, legal documents revealing Daniel's competency proceedings, and testimony from Dr. Chin about their interference with my medical care. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, leaving them unable to maintain their revised narratives about having acted in my best interests. The revelation about my planned donation to cancer research using money that would have been family inheritance created the most dramatic reaction. I explained that I was establishing a foundation specifically to support cancer patients who experienced family abandonment during treatment, using resources they'd assumed would eventually benefit them. Their shocked expressions revealed that they'd been planning for my death and the financial benefits it would provide. My announcement that I intended to pursue legal action against Jessica's business for intellectual property theft created immediate panic. The consulting contracts she'd obtained using stolen concepts from my work represented clear cases of fraud and copyright violation. Her business, already struggling due to her inability to execute the ideas she'd appropriated, would likely collapse entirely under legal scrutiny and public exposure of the theft. The most satisfying moment came when I revealed that I'd been working with attorneys to ensure that none of them could ever claim ownership or credit for Health AI Solutions innovations. The comprehensive legal protections we'd established would prevent any attempt to associate themselves with my success or benefit from the platform's continued development and deployment. As I stood to leave that final family meeting, I made it clear that while I forgave them for my own emotional healing, forgiveness didn't require maintaining relationships with people who had demonstrated such fundamental disregard for my well-being. I explained that Dr. Chin, James, Maria, and Dr. Foster had become my chosen family, people who supported me unconditionally rather than viewing my vulnerability as opportunity for exploitation. The contrast between their desperate attempts to reconnect and my calm detachment revealed how completely the power dynamic had shifted. They needed me now more than I had ever needed them, but I'd learned to build a life based on authentic relationships rather than biological obligations. Their betrayal had freed me from the illusion that family relationships were inherently valuable regardless of how destructively people behaved. Walking out of that conference room for the final time, I felt the last emotional chains of their manipulation break completely. They could no longer hurt me because I'd learned to find love, support, and belonging with people who chose to value me rather than exploit me. Their abandonment during my cancer treatment had been devastating, but it had ultimately led me to discover what genuine family really meant. The acquisition of Health AI Solutions was completed on a crisp autumn morning exactly 2 years after my cancer diagnosis. As I signed the final documents that would transfer my company to MedTech Innovations for $92 million, I thought about how dramatically my definition of wealth had changed since that terrifying day in the hospital when my family's messages had made it clear I was facing cancer alone. My new role as Executive Vice President of Innovation gave me resources and platform to expand our early detection technology beyond anything I could have achieved independently. The first initiative I championed was implementing our platform in underserved communities where delayed diagnosis was most common and devastating. The technology that had grown from my own experience with cancer would now help save lives among populations who traditionally had limited access to cutting-edge medical care. The Cancer Support Foundation I established became my most meaningful professional accomplishment. The foundation specifically focused on patients who experienced family abandonment during treatment, providing both financial assistance and emotional support for people navigating cancer while dealing with betrayal from those who should have been their strongest advocates. Dr. Chen served as our chief medical advisor, while James and Maria helped develop practical support programs based on their own experiences with family crisis during illness. Our first major initiative was creating chosen family support networks that connected cancer patients with volunteers who could provide the emotional and practical support that biological families had failed to offer. These relationships often became permanent friendships that outlasted treatment periods, demonstrating that love and loyalty could be found among strangers who shared values rather than DNA. Dr. Foster became not only my business partner, but also my closest friend and mentor. Her own experience surviving cancer while maintaining professional excellence helped guide both my recovery and my approach to building meaningful work around life-threatening illness. Together, we developed additional healthcare technologies that addressed various aspects of patient advocacy and support during medical crises. The scholarship program we created for cancer patients pursuing entrepreneurship became particularly close to my heart. Too many people abandoned their professional dreams during treatment, either because family members convinced them to focus on getting better or because they lacked support networks to maintain their ambitions during recovery periods. Our scholarships provided both financial assistance and mentorship to help people pursue innovation and success regardless of health challenges. James and Maria Rodriguez truly became the parents I'd never had, providing unconditional support and guidance without attempts to control or manipulate my decisions. James continued working at the hospital while also helping coordinate our foundation's practical support programs, using his natural ability to connect with people during their most vulnerable moments. Maria's business expertise proved invaluable as we scaled our operations and developed partnerships with medical centers nationwide. The most rewarding aspect of my new life was helping other families heal from similar betrayal situations. Many cancer patients experienced some level of family dysfunction during treatment, and our counseling programs helped people distinguish between relationships worth salvaging and those that required permanent boundaries for emotional safety. We discovered that family abandonment during medical crises was far more common than public discussion suggested, and that survivors often blamed themselves for others' selfish behavior. My relationship with my biological family evolved into complete emotional detachment with clear legal boundaries. Jessica's consulting business collapsed entirely when our intellectual property lawsuit revealed the extent of her fraud and theft. Daniel faced professional consequences when his workplace discovered his misrepresentations about healthcare technology expertise. Linda and Robert lost their social standing in our community when the truth about their financial abuse and emotional abandonment became public knowledge. The most satisfying justice was watching them face the natural consequences of their choices without any intervention from me. Their reputations suffered, their relationships deteriorated, and their financial situations declined as people learned about their calculated cruelty during my cancer treatment. I didn't need to pursue revenge because their own actions had created inevitable accountability. My health remained excellent as I approached the 5-year mark of being cancer-free. Regular monitoring continued, but Dr. Chin was optimistic about my long-term prognosis, and my physical strength had returned completely. The emotional healing took longer than the physical recovery, but building authentic relationships with people who valued loyalty and integrity helped restore my faith in human goodness. The platform's continued development brought recognition from medical organizations worldwide as our early detection capabilities improved and expanded to cover additional types of cancer. Hospitals reported significant improvements in patient outcomes when our technology identified diseases weeks or months earlier than traditional screening methods. Knowing that my experience with delayed diagnosis was helping prevent similar situations for thousands of other patients gave deeper meaning to the suffering I'd endured. Looking back on the journey from family abandonment during chemotherapy to building a $92 million company while fighting cancer, I realized that their betrayal had been a devastating gift. It had forced me to discover my own strength, develop genuine relationships, and build something far more meaningful than what I could have achieved with their conditional support. The most important lesson I learned was that true family is built through choice, loyalty, and mutual respect rather than biological connection or social obligation. Dr. Chen, James, Maria, and Dr. Foster chose to support me during my darkest period without expecting anything in return, while my biological family had viewed my vulnerability as an opportunity for their advancement. The difference between chosen love and obligated relationships became the foundation for everything I built afterward. My life now feels full in ways I never imagined possible during those terrifying months, when cancer and family betrayal seemed like they would destroy everything I'd worked to build. The foundation helps hundreds of cancer patients annually, the technology saves lives through early detection, and the relationships I've built provide the security and belonging that were missing during my childhood and young adulthood. As I share this story, I want other people facing similar betrayals to understand that survival is possible and that building better relationships after toxic family abandonment can lead to more authentic happiness than maintaining dysfunction out of obligation. Cancer took my hair temporarily, but family betrayal revealed character permanently, helping me distinguish between people worth trusting and those who view relationships as opportunities for exploitation. The morning I wake up in my home surrounded by photos of my chosen family, working on projects that save lives and support people during their most vulnerable moments, I feel gratitude for the journey that brought me here, even the painful parts that forced me to grow and discover what really matters in life. Have you ever experienced family betrayal during a crisis, or do you know someone who has built success from complete abandonment? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below, because these stories of resilience help others realize they're not alone in facing impossible situations. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more content about overcoming adversity and building authentic success. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that survival and thriving are possible even after the deepest betrayals. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes the family we choose becomes stronger and more meaningful than the one we were born into. Wishing everyone the courage to build relationships based on genuine love and support rather than obligation or manipulation.